just hanging around the house, so he would go to the swimming pool. I go sit there.
Before the tour buses, before the velvet ropes and ticket booths, before Graceland became a shrine, it was just a home. A home filled with the echoes of bare feet on marble floors at midnight. A home where voices drifted down long hallways, sometimes laughing, sometimes whispering, sometimes gone completely quiet. And in the middle of that home, cleaning, listening, staying invisible, was a woman history never thought to name. She wasn't a star. She wasn't family. She never signed autographs, never gave interviews, never asked for a single thing. But she was there, morning after morning, night after night, folding clothes, clearing plates, watching the pieces of a man unravel behind the curtain the world never saw through. Her name was Nancy Rooks. She didn't ask to be part of a legacy. She didn't chase it. It found her, quietly, almost by accident. A last-minute call from a staffing agency, a sick maid, a temporary job filling in at a house on Elvis Presley Boulevard. That's how it started. A week? Maybe 2. Just until the other girl came back. That's what they told her. But Graceland had its own gravity. It pulled her in, not because she was flashy or famous, but because she was the opposite. Nancy blended in. She moved like wallpaper, soft, silent, always watching. And Elvis noticed, not the way fans noticed, not the way cameras flashed. It was subtler than that. He noticed that she didn't flinch, that she didn't gossip, that she never asked for anything but did everything asked of her. And so she stayed. Through the chaos, through the years, through the decline. While the world outside built a myth of rhinestones and stadium lights, Nancy saw the man behind the myth, barefoot, half asleep, staring into a refrigerator at 2 a.m. like he didn't know what he was looking for anymore. For almost a decade, she watched it all. And for the rest of her life, she said almost nothing. Until the end. And when she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud. But it changed everything. Because the one person nobody ever thought to ask had seen everything. And she remembered. Before the chandeliers were roped off. Before the jungle room became a backdrop for selfies. Graceland was alive. Not polished. Not perfect. Alive. It breathed in rhythms most people never got to hear. The creak of old floorboards, the echo of laughter down hallways, the sudden slam of a door in the middle of the night. It was messy and magnificent. A living, breathing home that never quite slept. Nancy Rooks first stepped into that world in 1974. She thought she was just filling in for a sick co-worker. A couple of days, maybe a week. That's all it was supposed to be. But the moment she walked through the front door, something felt different. The air was heavier. Not with dust, but with something intangible. Secrets, maybe. Stories stuck in the walls. It didn't feel like a house. It felt like a storm waiting to break. And at the center of that storm was a man the world worshipped. But Nancy only saw in slippers and a robe. Elvis wasn't always a spectacle. Sometimes he was just a man hunched over a kitchen table at 1 a.m., mumbling to himself as he stirred sugar into his coffee. Sometimes he was barefoot, his hair flattened from sleep, asking for fried pickles or his favorite peanut butter and banana sandwich. Sometimes he said nothing at all, just wandered into the room like he didn't remember why he was there in the first place. Graceland pulsed with life in those years. People came and went. Bodyguards, girlfriends, musicians, cousins. Some stayed for months, others vanished by morning. But through it all, Nancy stayed. She stayed through the racket of late-night rehearsals in the den. Through shouting matches no one was supposed to hear. through long stretches of eerie silence when Elvis disappeared behind locked doors and no one dared to ask where he went. She didn't judge. She didn't pry. She dusted the gold records. She turned down the sheets. She learned when to speak and when to stay invisible. And in doing so, she became a witness to something no museum could ever recreate: the humanity hidden beneath the icon. Graceland wasn't a monument back then. It was a man's sanctuary, his prison, his playground, and his stage. It was where Elvis Presley stopped performing, and where the cracks began to show. And Nancy was there for all of it. To the world, Elvis was larger than life, a king, a phenomenon, the man who broke television records and made crowds faint with a single wink. But to Nancy, he was often just tired. She saw it in the quiet hours when the mansion had gone still and the lights in the kitchen flickered low. That's when he would appear, barefoot, hair tousled, robe dragging behind him like a forgotten costume. No entourage, no spotlight, just a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sometimes he spoke, other times he didn't. "Got any peach cobbler?" he'd ask softly, like a child asking for something he wasn't sure he deserved. Other nights, it was fried pickles, or nothing at all, just coffee and silence. He'd stare into the refrigerator for minutes on end, not moving, not blinking, like he was trying to remember what hunger used to feel like. Nancy never pushed. She knew instinctively when to step in and when to simply be present. Sometimes, that's all he wanted. Someone who didn't expect a performance. Someone who saw the man, not the myth. But there were other nights. Nights when something deeper cracked through. He'd sit at the kitchen table with Grandma Minnie, his voice low, singing hymns he hadn't sung in years. Not the flashy gospel of his recordings. These were whispered songs, half-remembered melodies from childhood. Simple, sacred, songs about redemption, about grace. Nancy never joined in. She just listened as their voices floated into the stillness, fragile and honest. And when the last note faded, Elvis would sit there, staring into nothing. There were days he was vibrant, joking, charming, humming tunes under his breath. But those moments were getting rarer. Nancy began to notice the patterns, the long absences upstairs, the sudden shifts in mood, the strange combination of energy and exhaustion that hung around him like a shadow. His laugh would echo through the hall one moment, then vanish the next. His eyes, once electric, started to dull. And sometimes, even in a room full of people, he looked completely alone. Nancy didn't have the words for it then, but she understood what it meant to see someone slowly retreat from the world, even as the world refused to let them go. Elvis wasn't falling apart in public. He was unraveling in private, quietly, invisibly, while the cameras kept rolling outside. And the only person truly watching, in a house as vast as Graceland, with its glittering rooms and velvet hallways, there was one door that slowly became more important than all the rest. It wasn't the front entrance, where fans once waited, hoping for a glimpse. It wasn't the music room, or the jungle room, or the kitchen where laughter sometimes lived. It was upstairs, a simple door, plain, closed more often than not. The bathroom. On paper, it was just a place to wash, to rest, to disappear for a while. But to Elvis, it became something else entirely. A fortress, a hiding place, a last defense against a world that wouldn't stop watching. Nancy noticed the shift long before anyone said it out loud. At first, he'd vanish behind that door for minutes at a time. Then, hours. Then, whole afternoons would pass without a sound. No footsteps, no water running, just silence pressing against the walls like something was waiting. No one knocked. Not the bodyguards, not the girlfriends, not even family. And Nancy? She only approached if she absolutely had to. Even then, she paused at the threshold, heart thudding, hand hesitant. Because that door wasn't just shut, it was sealed. With grief, with exhaustion, with something darker no one could quite name. Sometimes, when he finally emerged, Elvis looked hollow. Not high, not dramatic, just emptied out. Like he'd fought something behind those walls and lost a little more of himself each time. Nancy began to wonder what, exactly, he was escaping from in there. The pressure, the crowds, the weight of being Elvis Presley every waking second? Or was it something deeper, some quiet, gnawing sadness that only showed itself when the cameras were gone and the lights were off? That bathroom held no answers, but Nancy felt it in her bones. Whatever was happening behind that door, it wasn't about vanity or privacy. It was retreat. It was surrender. And somewhere in the silence of those long hours, she feared something none of them dared speak aloud. That one day, he might go in and not come back out. August 16th, 1977, began like any other summer morning in Memphis. The cicadas buzzed. The air hung heavy with heat. And inside Graceland, the kitchen lights flicked on just before dawn. Nancy was already up. She knew the rhythm by now. Elvis came home late, usually after a game of racquetball, sweaty and flushed, but in good spirits. It was her cue to start the skillet, maybe heat up some biscuits, maybe fry some bacon if he looked like he needed it. That morning she turned just as the screen door creaked open. He was there, standing in the doorway, damp hair sticking to his forehead, breathing just a little heavier than usual. "You want something to eat, Mr. Elvis?" she asked, the way she always did. But this time, he didn't smile. He didn't joke. He didn't even sit down. He just shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I just want some water." She handed him a plastic jug, the kind they usually used for orange juice. And what she saw next stayed with her for the rest of her life. He didn't sip it. He drank it. Long, desperate gulps, like something inside him had scorched overnight. His throat moved quickly. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes, when they flicked up to meet hers, were distant, far off, not panicked, not sad, just tired. Nancy thought maybe it was the game. Maybe he was just overheated. That's what she told herself. But deep down, something felt different. She'd never seen him look quite like that before. There was a fog behind his eyes, a strange stillness in his limbs, almost like he was already somewhere else, partway between here and wherever he wanted to be instead. When he handed back the jug, he nodded once, softly. And then, without another word, he turned and walked upstairs. Nancy didn't know it at the time, but that would be the last time she ever saw him alive. No grand goodbye, no final speech. Just a man with tired eyes, drinking water like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world, and walking into the silence behind a door no one would ever open again. After Elvis died, the world exploded. Headlines screamed. Books were written before the body was buried. People who had barely stepped foot inside Graceland suddenly remembered everything. Every word he ever said, every look, every rumor. And yet, through all of it, Nancy Rooks said nothing. She kept showing up to work, quietly, night after night, cleaning the display cases, dusting the furniture in rooms that once held life, and now held only echoes. The same woman who had once folded Elvis's shirts and watched him sing hymns at the kitchen table. She watched now as strangers walked through those same rooms, pointing, whispering, speculating. Everyone wanted their piece of the story. Nancy never sold hers. It wasn't that she didn't have stories to tell. She had hundreds, but she kept them close, tucked away like folded napkins in a drawer. Not out of fear. Not because someone told her to, because it hurt too much to say them out loud. People assumed her silence was loyalty. Others thought it was fear of being disbelieved. But those who truly knew her knew the weight in her shoulders, the long pauses before she spoke, understood the truth. She wasn't hiding something for Elvis. She was grieving something for herself. You see, Nancy didn't lose a celebrity. She lost a person. A man who once asked her if peach cobbler was ready, who once looked her in the eye and said nothing but meant everything. She didn't want to turn him into a headline, so she carried the silence. Not because it was easy, but because it was sacred. Years passed, decades. The world moved on, but Nancy never stopped remembering. And eventually, as time wore her down and age made the memories heavier to hold, something began to shift. Not because she wanted attention, but because she couldn't carry it much longer. When she finally opened her mouth to speak, it wasn't to a crowd. It wasn't on television. It was in a quiet room, to a friend. Her voice cracked when she said it. "I don't think he died the way they said he did." And just like that, the silence broke. Not loudly, but finally. It wasn't a confession. Not really. Nancy didn't sit down with the intention of breaking news. There were no reporters, no lights, just a friend, a recorder, and a woman at the end of her life, trying to make peace with what she'd seen. Her voice was thin, worn down by time and memory. "They say he overdosed," she said, "but I don't think he died the way they said he did." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Because what came next wasn't speculation. It was observation. She talked about the books she used to dust off his nightstand. Worn paperbacks about meditation, about reincarnation, about healing and starting over. She'd catch him reading late into the night, alone, legs tucked under him like a boy, flipping pages like he was searching for a way out. He wasn't numbing himself. He was looking for something real, something that didn't come with screaming fans and flashing lights. One night, just a few days before he died, Elvis had turned to her with eyes that looked almost clear for the first time in years. "You think people can start over?" he asked. Nancy remembered pausing, then smiling. "I think they can." He nodded once, and then he said it. Not like a joke. Not like a dream. "Maybe I will." She didn't ask what he meant. Maybe she didn't want to know. But decades later, that sentence clung to her like a thread she never pulled, afraid of what it might unravel. Because if Elvis Presley truly meant those words, then maybe he wasn't planning to die at all. Maybe he was planning to disappear. Even after the funeral crowds faded and the headlines moved on, Nancy kept working. Graceland was different now, museum glossed, frozen in time. But at night, when the tours were over and the halls fell silent again, something still stirred beneath the stillness. Sometimes, she'd be dusting the trophy room and the lights would flicker, just once, like a breath passing through. Other times, she swore she heard a single footstep behind her. Not hurried, not threatening, just familiar. She never called it a ghost. That wasn't her way. To Nancy, it felt more like someone checking in. One night, long after midnight, she lay down beside the display case, just to rest for a moment. The house was quiet, until it wasn't. Something touched her foot. Gentle, firm, like a nudge, like someone waking her up. She sat up, heart thudding, eyes scanning the empty room. No one there. But she didn't run. She didn't scream. She just smiled. "Mr. Elvis," she whispered, "I know what you did. You woke me up." And somehow, it made perfect sense, because maybe he never really left. Maybe he was still pacing the halls, still keeping watch. Maybe, after all these years, he just needed someone to finally hear the truth he couldn't say himself. And maybe now, someone finally did.